Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today's video is going to be an introduction to scrapers. We'll cover how to use them, when to use them, and how to sharpen them. So what is a scraper? Scrapers are generally made from flat milled stock in varying thicknesses and widths, with different varying profiles on each end of the tool for different cuts and different applications. Sometimes they have a double bevel, most of the time they have a single bevel, but they can be used for a lot of different things, and we'll show you that in just a minute. Many wood turning purists would have you believe that scrapers are a beginner's tool and have no place in the toolbox of an adequate wood turner. However, I don't subscribe to that kind of thinking. Many world-class turners, including Rake, Richard Raffin, Alan and Stuart Batty, Glenn Lucas, and many others, use scrapers to great effect because they know when and how to use them. So let's get into the video and we'll show you what each of these different profiles is used for and how you can use it to improve your turnings. As you can see, we have a varying array of different scrapers on the table. Let's go over the different profile types that we have, and then we'll go to the lathe and show you the different cuts with each one. The first one we have is a spear point scraper. This is probably one of my most used scrapers that I have, and I like it because it's got an extra thick bar stock at 3/8. Next up here we have two different French curve profile scrapers. One's a regular grind, and this one here is a negative rake grind, which we'll cover in just a moment. But the French curve profile is really beneficial on the inside of bowls with an undercut rim, and we'll go over the different uses on those. Next up we have a box scraper. This has been ground with a slight relief on the nose here. That way you can have a nice crisp corner down inside of a utility box, a regular box, but this just allows you to have a nice straight wall with a sharp corner in the bottom. The other thing to mention too, this is a 3/8 thick tool. That way it minimizes the chatter and vibration when you're further over a rest inside of a box. Next up here we have just a regular square point scraper with a negative rake on it. Generally most square end scrapers I don't usually use. I usually buy those and get them just so I can have the nice square stock to then grind a box scraper or a custom grind scraper later down the road. Next up here is a round nose scraper. Round nose scrapers are really good for getting inside small opening type vessels, but generally I prefer the French curve profile because it gives me more cutting edge across the surface. And lastly, we have here just a custom ground scraper. I started off with a square end scraper and then ground a relief into it with a small radius on the front for doing birdhouses and getting a really good undercut rim with a small opening. So the nice thing about these being flat stock, you can grind these to whatever shapes your turnings are going to be. If you need to grind a special tool to fit inside a certain opening, that's where you're going to grind your own. So now that we've covered what scrapers are and what scrapers are available, let's go to the lathe and we'll show you some different cuts, and we'll start out with the spear point scraper. Alright, so we're here with our spear point scraper. So with the spear point, we've got a 3/8 thick bar stock section, and you can see we have a nice radius curve to a nice sharp point in the center, but that gives us a lot of cutting surface on this tool. And because it's 3/8 thick, we don't have a lot of chatter or vibration, a very sturdy tool. And then as far as our bevel goes, we have roughly a 70-degree bevel here. You can grind that down to a steeper angle if you'd like. I know Matt Monaco's have a lot steeper bevel on there, but I've been pretty happy with this 70-degree. Let me show you the cuts you can use the spear point for. And I've got basically a 7/8 inch bowl walnut here, and I did a push cut with my gouge to get to this point, and you can see I've got some compression marks from that bevel riding just a little bit too hard. So let me show you what you can do to refine this surface without shear scraping with the gouge. So I like the curve that we have on the piece. The surface is cut really cleanly, but there are these compression marks that I do want to get rid of so I don't have to sand those out. The way we can use the spear point scraper is by doing a shearing cut with the spear point, and we'll be basically dragging this lightly across the surface of our piece, and it's going to be taken off in a very fine shaving. The reason I like to shear scrape with this versus a gouge is, I don't know if you can see here, but I have basically 3 times the cutting edge just on one half of the tool that I do with my more expensive bowl gouge. So I can do a lot more cuts with this tool at a cheaper price and spend less time at the grinder than I would with my bowl gouge. Most guys would just rotate this over and shear scrape it out with a gouge, but I've got a lot more cutting edge on my spear point that can do the exact same thing and have the same result. So let's start with our lathe. This size of piece will be about 1500 RPM. And when you're shear scraping with this tool, I want the handle to be really low, and it's kind of an aggressive looking angle here. But the nice thing is it's very easy to control because we're not doing bevel contact with the scraper. We're just lightly gliding that cutting edge across the wood. It's very easy to control. So with that tool at about a 45 degree off the tool rest, we're not using this flat, nice and 45 degrees, and I've got that handle nice and low. This is going to give us a really good shear scrape. And then I'm just dragging this up the work surface. And the piece is just a hair out around from when I turned it the other day. So we're just going to true up the surface. And you can see we're getting really fine shavings. We're not getting so much dust off the cutter. We are getting a really fine shaving. And the nice thing is because it has such a large cutting area, as a certain spot gets dull, you can just adjust the handle up or down a little bit to be cutting on a new section of that wing. But I'll use this tool to refine curves that I've already got from a gouge, and just refining that surface to get rid of any of those rubbing bevel marks that you might get off of a bowl gouge. As you can see, this area that we turned, all those tool marks are gone and there's no tear out. It's cut nice and clean, even on the figure with the end grain fibers sticking out. So let's just move our tool rest over a little bit and we can get this side here. Very easy to control. The only thing that you really want to be careful of is the very tip of this point. So you can see those shavings we're getting off. They're like spider webs. We're getting a really fine shaving. That means we're cutting clean. Surface looks really good. But the one thing you do want to be careful of is the very tip of the tool. As you're shear scraping, if you raise that handle slightly or you have an OG curve right there, you might catch that tip of the tool and you'll have a catastrophic catch. So always be aware of where the tip of the tool is and make sure you're cutting down here on this lower wing. Generally, I try to stay about 3/4 of the way and then down. I never try to cut towards the tip unless the tool is held nice and flat, like a traditional scraper. And then you can get in there into those detail coves. You can put some detail lines in with that fine point. You can cut your tenon depending on the shape of your spear point. But in that case, that tool wants to be held nice and flat on the tool rest with the handle level and parallel to the floor. So as we're shear scraping, again, we're at a 45 degree angle. And then the handle's held nice and low at our hip, and we're just lightly gliding that surface, or that tool across the surface. So that's going to leave you a really good surface on the outside of a bowl, and because we have a cutting edge on both sides of the tool, you can do it as it's remounted in the chuck. If you need to true up your piece, you can do the same cuts coming from the headstock towards the tailstock. Another nice thing too is, let me switch the bowls out here. So that's working on the outside of a small bowl. Now let's work on the inside of a bowl. Right here I've got a piece of really highly figured poplar. This stuff is extremely prone to tear out and really hard to cut clean even with a really sharp gouge. So I like to use the spear point to clean up my rim because I can get that nice concave shape and slight radius to the rim that I've got here. But let's show you the surface that it'll leave behind with a spear point. So you can see the outside of the bowl is not running perfectly true, but you could use that spear point to come from the chuck towards the rim of the bowl to clean that up. But let's show you on the rim here. It's going to be the exact same thing, tool held at roughly a 45 degree angle. We've got that handle nice and low, and here I want to be very careful to watch the tip of the tool. If I get that handle too far over, that tip's going to contact the rim and it might break your piece, have it come out of the chuck, or you can have a really bad catch. So I want to make sure I've got the handle to where that point's not going to be in anywhere near contact with the rim, and we're cutting just on this wing. So we've got the handle nice and low, we've got the tip out of the line of fire where it's not going to contact the rim, and we're just going to glide this across the surface. We're going to true up the rim as well. But you can see those wispy little shavings we're getting. That means we're cutting and not necessarily scraping, even though we are using a scraper. A shear scrape is a really clean cut, where a regular scrape is going to be more prone to tear out. But I can just work this across the surface, back and forward. Extremely easy to use. Very little chance of a catch, as long as you keep the tip out of the way. Let's stop the lathe and take a look at the surface we have here. So you can see, even on a piece that's extremely difficult to cut, we have a really clean surface. With as much vigor as this is, a regular bowl gouge, we'd still probably have some tear out. So that's why you want a shear scrape. It's going to leave you a really clean surface behind, and it allows you to really focus on your shape and the aesthetics of your piece, and not so much focusing on tool control, bevel contact, and all the things that go into using the bowl gouge. So traditionally, I'd be using the bowl gouge to get my rough shape, then I'll go to a shear scraper to refine that. That's what these tools are for. They're not really bulk removal tools. This is for refining and getting your shape and getting a better enhanced surface quality finish on our piece. So that's what I use the spear point for. The nice thing is because we're sharpening so little, just a quick pass on the grinder to get our nice sharp burr back on there, this tool will last a really, really long time, even with a lot of use. Now that we've shown you how to use the spear point, we're at a time now where it's probably needing to be sharpened. The burr, I can't really feel the burr there left anymore. I can feel it on this side because we weren't using it. But this side, the burr is gone. So now that we've shown how to use it, let's go to the grinder and show you how to sharpen this tool. All right, so sharpening scrapers is very easy because we have a single bevel or we have a double bevel. It's not that complicated, but we're using the platform, which is really easy. And there's not a lot of risk of coming off the wheel. And if it does, there's not really anywhere for it to go like it is when it's in the very grind jig. So with our grinder set up here, we've got our platform. We have a CBN wheel. This is going to give us a really fine finish on our tool. And I believe this is a 320 grit. With our grinding angles on our scrapers, I would say shoot for anywhere between 70 and 80 degrees. The blunter you get, closer to 90, the more the nose of the tool is going to keep the tool from really cutting very well. And the steeper you go, if you start going 60 degrees or below, it's going to start to get way too aggressive. So shoot for that 70 to 80 degrees, and you can set that by using a protractor or an angle gauge or something on your platform to match your grinding angles that you need. All right, so to sharpen our spear point scraper, we have two wings here that we're going to sharpen. I like to do just a single bevel on my spear points, not a negative rake, and this is roughly 70 degrees. So generally on my scrapers, I try to shoot for between 70 and 80 degrees. That's a really good angle I've found. Anything blunter than that, the heel of the tool is kind of in the way, as well as anything steeper than that is going to be a little too aggressive, especially on our round nose and our French curve scrapers. I've got our 320 grit CBN wheel here. That's going to give us a really fine bevel and burr on our tool, and our platform here is set. You can use a protractor to set your angle, or a lot of the times I just match up the bevel that's already on the tool that I've got. I just check for any light between the tool and the wheel, and then I just start sharpening from there. So if you have a specific angle you're shooting for, use a little protractor to match your angle you need. As far as sharpening goes, make sure everything is locked in. You've got your platform locked, that way it doesn't tip into the wheel and cause any damage or anything to the wheel. Or if you're using a stone wheel, it could cause that to blow up. So make sure everything locked down nice and tight. And with the pressure when you're sharpening your scraper, it's just light pressure. We're not really pushing into our wheel at all. You don't need to push in really hard, especially on the CBNs. They overheat the steel a little bit too quick. So let's turn this on and we'll show you how to sharpen. I'm going to start out on my bottom of the wing here where it meets the straight. And then I'll just gently swing the handle towards me. Making sure to keep this nice and flat on my wheel, and then I'll work that to the point, and then I'll work that back to that straight edge, and then back to the point, and that'll give us a really, really good, nice fine burr here, great for shear scraping. And you can see we've got a really clean bevel, and then the same thing we'll do on this wing. So I'm going to start out on that corner where the straight meets, and then we'll swing that to the tip, and then we'll swing that back to the straight side. And that should leave us a really clean surface. So there's not a lot required for sharpening scrapers. It's fairly simple. A lot of guys get into the bevel angles and get a little too pedantic with it and overcomplicate things, but a good single bevel on there, roughly 70-80 degrees. Now let's show you the French curve profile and the negative rake French curve. All right, so now that we've shown you the spear point and how to do the outside of a bowl as well as the rim of a bowl, truing up that surface and getting a clean cut, let's go to our French curve profile scrapers. Here I've got a standard French curve and then I have a negative rake French curve. With the standard grind, this is going to be used more for bulk removal. It'll take a heavier cut. It tends to self-feed, so it's a little more grabby and catchy. But this is going to be used for removing more material if you need. The negative rake is going to be used for a refining pass, similar to our spear point, where it's taking off a very fine shaving and leaving a really clean surface. The nice thing about the negative rake is it doesn't self-feed, and there's really no way to get a good catch with these unless you're doing something really stupid. So you can see that French curve profile on there. It gives us basically 2.5 inches of cutting area on the tool, and it's good for getting in undercut rims, platters, nice continuous curves, but we have a lot of cutting area on these tools, so it's really beneficial because we can do a lot of different things and they're very versatile. So let's first start out with a standard grind scraper, show you what it's for, and then we'll go to the negative rake. Okay, so with our standard grind French curve radius here, I want my cutting edge to be on center or slightly above center to where I have to raise the handle so the cutting edge is on center. With this tool having basically an 80 degree, 70 to 80 degree bevel on here, this tool has the tendency to self-feed. And let me show you what that means. So the nice thing is we can use it to remove a lot of material and take a heavier shaving. However, the further you get over that rest, if I don't have my hand or arm on top of that, that tool tends to dig in and raise the handle, and it does what we call self-feed. So that's why we have the negative rake. But the benefit of this tool is I can use this to remove a lot of material. And with that French curve profile, I can get in that undercut rim by swinging the handle away from me. You can work from center to the rim or from the rim to the center. But the nice thing about this tool is because I'm just pivoting on a single axis in the center, it's really easy to control and it's really easy to get a nice, smooth, continuous curve on the inside of a bowl. You can see though, this scraper's left behind a lot of tear out with as much vigor in this type of wood that we have here. So you can remove a lot of material with the standard grind scrapers, whether it's a round nose or a French curve or square end, doesn't really matter. As our piece gets thinner and thinner, if we're working with a really thin wall thickness, if this tends to self-feed, you can have this dig in, catch, and blow your piece apart. So that's when you would want to go to a negative rake scraper. So generally, these are for heavier removal of material, getting your rough curve and form you have in your piece, and just getting stuff out of the way. Generally, this would be done after you've got all the material out with your bowl gouge, and then you're refining that curve with your round nose scraper. So from here, I'd go to my negative rake, and let me show you the difference between a self-feeding scraper and a negative rake scraper. And what is a negative rake scraper? It's basically any scraper that has a secondary or top bevel to the tool. Like here we have our standard grind profile, and then here we have our negative rake. You can see with the standard grind profile, it has just a single bevel on the nose, where with this guy, if we rotate that, we have that top bevel as well as our bottom bevel here on this side. So it doesn't matter what your bevel angles are on the top side, just make sure you have a nice clean bevel on the underneath, but you can see the differences between these two tools. Let me show you what it does when we go into a piece. So before with that other scraper, if I didn't have my hand on the top supporting it, it would raise that handle and dig in. Where this one, I can push into that wood and it's not trying to pull itself into the wood fibers, and it's not going to give me a nasty catch, especially as I get further over the rest. I can use this tool one-handed and it's not going to dig in and catch on me. Obviously you don't want to turn one-handed, but the nice thing is this is made for taking off a very fine amount of wood, allowing you to be much more controlling with your shape, sliding that across our surface, and this should give us a lot cleaner surface behind. Now we'll go from the rim to the inside. I can be a lot more gentle with how much pressure I'm applying to the tool because it's not going to catch on me. But you can see we're getting a really fine shaving just like we were when we were shear scraping. But let's see if we've refined the surface. So the tear out here is definitely minimized. I think the tear out was deep enough that we need to take a few more cuts with our negative rake to get rid of that completely. And because of our cutting edge isn't at the very top of our tool, I do need to raise this up slightly. I want that cutting edge to be right on center. If I need to raise the handle, that's acceptable. But let's just refine our curve here. Try and get rid of that tear out we've left behind. And generally with negative rake scraping, you can increase the speed because you're not worried about getting a catch. The faster the piece is going is generally going to leave you a better surface behind. But you can see just how easy this tool is to control. And we're just going to try and remove that tear out and smooth out the curve. As the cutting edge gets dull, you can swing that handle around to start cutting more on this wing rather than the front of the tool. That way we have a nice sharp edge. And then we'll just swing that handle around to our rim. But I'm really happy with the curve we have there, and we've pretty much got rid of all the tear out on the inside of that bowl. So especially with a piece like this, that's really impressive, and you can see just the difference it makes having a top ground bevel or a negative rake grind on this tool. As far as the bevel angles go, it really doesn't matter what degree of bevel angle you really have on here. I know a lot of internet forum guys argue a matching 33-degree bevel is best, you know, a 60-40, whatever. I haven't really found it to be the case. As long as you have the top bevel, no matter how long or short that bevel is, as long as there's two different angles, usually it's going to work out just fine for you. So as you can see with all the facets on here, I don't really care what my top bevel is, as long as my bottom bevel has a nice continuous grind on here. That way we've got a nice sharp cutting burr. The downside, however, to negative rake tools is the cutting edge doesn't last and stay as sharp as long. Because there's not really any tool underneath the burr supporting it as you're cutting, that burr wears out really, really quick. We're talking seconds. So on a piece like this, I'd probably do 1 or 2 passes and then touch it up on my grinder, do a couple more passes till I was satisfied with the surface finish on my piece. So those are the different cuts you can do with a French curve profile, as well as the differences between a standard ground scraper and a negative rake. So let's go to the grinder and now we'll show you how to sharpen these. So here we have our single bevel French curve scraper, very similar sharpening to the spear point. Again, just match up the bevel to your platform that you already had, or you can set it at 70 or 80 degrees. And we'll start the grinder. And same thing, just light pressure. And we're just working to glide that back and forth. I don't need to press into the wheel very hard at all. So that's going to give us a really clean bevel, a nice fine burr on our edge. But if you needed to, one of the things you can do is you can get a small diamond hone the top of this, get rid of that burr, and then come up here on the bevel and just get a new burr with a small little diamond hone. That's a quick way. If you're at the lathe and you're doing a lot of turning, you can just hone that up real quick and then eventually go back to your grinder and then reprofile and get a nice fresh burr. So I generally don't use the diamond hones very much because my grinder's right next to my lathe. So I usually just keep my platform set for the scraper that I'll be using, and then I can just run it and do a quick sharpening, and it's going to be a little bit quicker. So do it depending on whatever you like. If you want to use the diamond hone, go ahead. If not, just use your wheel. All right, so here we have our French curve. This is the negative rake. You can see I've got a ton of different bevels ground onto the top of this just to remove material. It doesn't look very pretty, but it works really good. But generally speaking, you only grind the bottom bevel until your top bevel is basically non-existent, and then at that point, that is when you'd go to grind a new top bevel. So I'll only sharpen the bottom bevel of our tool until that creeps all the way back here to where we don't really have a secondary bevel, and then I would resurface the top of this. But same thing with our other grinders. You can set this up with a protractor, or you can match. You can look underneath the wheel and see if there's any light coming between the bevel and the wheel itself, and that way you can set a bevel angle that way as well, just to match up what I've currently got. If I needed a reprofile, I'd go to my stone wheel because the CBNs don't remove a lot of steel. So just match up your bevel angle, use a protractor, and then from there it's going to be the same process as we did on the regular French curve and our spear point. And depending on how far your cutting edge is, you might need to move your platform a little closer to the wheel. But you can see we've got a really good bevel here, a nice fine burr, and a nice clean grind on the underside of our tool here. So again, I only grind my top bevel. Once that bevel is basically non-existent, then I'll reprofile the top. Otherwise, you just grind the bottom bevel for your negative rake scrapers. All right, so now that we're done with the French curve, let's go into the round nose scraper. Generally speaking, when I use a round nose scraper, it's going to be a little bit narrower of a tool, and it's going to be used for a little smaller projects. Specifically on boxes where I need a radius bottom or a radius lid, something like that, or on a smaller bowl where I have a severe undercut on my rim and that bigger French curve isn't going to get the curve I need, and just a little bit smaller size bowl. So generally speaking, smaller scraper is going to be used for smaller, tighter curves. But the nice thing is, like on a box like this, I can get on the inside here. We turn in about 2,000 RPM. And this one has just a traditional single bevel grind on it. It's not a negative rake scraper, so it will tend to get more aggressive as I get further over my rest. And we're cutting into end grain fibers. But the nice thing is, these round nose scrapers, I can pivot. My axis is going to be right here in the center of the tool, and I'm just going to be swinging that handle to get a nice radius. And if this was the bottom of a finished box, if I clear these shavings out, you can see we can get in there and get a really tight curve, and that's going to allow us a little more freedom of shape and flexibility with our design choices as well. So really good tool. I like the round nose scraper. I definitely keep one of these in the toolbox, but generally it's reserved for smaller projects where I have a really tight curve. So let's go to the grinder and we'll show you how to sharpen these. All right, with our round nose here, again, we just want to maintain the profile of that radius on the nose. It's pretty straightforward, flat on the tool rest or the platform. And then we're just swinging this handle. Make sure your body's out of the way so you can make that curve. As far as our bevel angle goes, we're roughly about 70 to 80 degrees. I kind of stick to that standard on all my scrapers. I usually like to start away from me and then swing that towards myself. And once I get to the end there, then I'll swing it back across. And then one more pass back to me. All right, let's take a look at our bevel. We continue that nice radius we had here on the tip, and you can see that bevel. We got a nice, even, consistent bevel all the way across the tool. Got that nice burr. So now let's show you what you can do with a box scraper. Alright, so now that we've done the round nose scraper, let's go into a box scraper. So this started out life as just a regular square end scraper. This is 3/8 thick bar stock, and generally with my square end scrapers, I like to bring this right wing back just a little bit. That way when I'm doing a box and I'm further over the rest, I don't engage the entire cutting edge, this 1/2 inch, 3/4 wide piece of steel all at one time. With that slight radius on the tip of the tool, it's only going to be cutting on a small section of this, so it'll keep it from being too grabby and too aggressive. But you can see we've got that slight sweep on the tip of the tool. And then the other thing too is I've ground the side of this tool as a relief grind to get this away from the side of my boxes. Because as you're doing a nice straight cut to have a straight wall on the inside of your boxes, this thickness of steel, a lot of times depending on the opening size, this bottom corner will be hitting this side of the wood here, and it'll be pushing the tool away. So that relief grind gives me clearance for this to cut a nice straight wall without interfering with the wood, and then that radius tip keeps it from getting too aggressive on the inside of a box. But I can still get a really nice flat bottom, especially if I'm doing like a utility box where it's got a flat base, or the coin box project, things like that. The nice thing is too is this is a single bevel grind on the nose, so it will remove material fairly quickly. But we can get a really good square shoulder on there, and we can have a straight wall. So let's show you some cuts with this. One thing to note when using a box scraper and we're getting further over our rest, the grip with our tool is going to be slightly different. I want to have my hand on top of the tool handle. That way, in the event of it grabbing, that tool handle doesn't kick up and hit me in the face or get out of control and dig in even further. That way my arm is there to stop the tool from grabbing and catching too much. But with this tool, I want to have a nice straight wall on the inside of my box, so I'm going to make sure that my tool is parallel with the bedways, and then I'll be cutting on this, basically the first 1/8 inch of this cutting edge on the nose, and I've got that tool nice and parallel to the floor. If anything, have the handle slightly raised, that way it'll keep it from being too aggressive. if I come in there with that handle drop down and I engage the cutting edge, that's gonna dig in really bad and it's probably gonna pull the piece out of the chuck, or it's gonna catch really, really bad. So make sure we have that at least parallel or slightly above center, and then I've got my arm in line or on top of the tool handle. I'm gonna stop right there and just show you before we go all the way in. So as you can see, we have a really nice square shoulder. This tool is really good for fitting box lids, because as you cut this recess to fit the tenon on the lower half of your box, you can get a really accurate fit and it cuts really, really cleanly. So that's the really good thing with the box scraper, especially with that relief grind out of the way. It's not tearing out those side grain fibers here on the side of this wall, and we have a really nice clean cut shoulder. So let's keep going a little bit further. I'm going to start and just lightly touch the left edge of my tool into the wall of the box, and then we'll keep advancing. And the nice thing is you can use the box scraper to get a flat bottom. So we'll just step this down. Again, I've got my hand on top, or my arm on top of the tool handle, and then I can just sweep that across the bottom of my project. As you can see, we have a really nice clean cut wall here on the inside of our box, and the bottom of that's nice and square with a nice crisp corner as well. And this tool cuts really cleanly, and we don't have a lot of torn fibers on those end grain in there as well. So the box scraper is really efficient at doing boxes, cutting recesses for a tenon to fit a lid, as well as getting a nice crisp corner. And again, it's just making sure you have that relief grind on the side with a slight sweeping radius on the nose. So really good tool. Let's go show you how to sharpen this, and then we'll go to the next tool. All right, for sharpening our box scraper, we just have to focus on our nose bevel here. That's going to be a single bevel grind, roughly 60 to 70 degrees, a little bit steeper than my French curve scrapers. And then the relief grind here is ground just on, it's basically an 80 degree here, just to remove steel out of the way. That way when you're working in a small box opening, you don't have this heel of the tool contacting the walls of the box. That can be done just on the stone wheel, just to remove that stock. Same thing on the platform. Make sure the handle's off to the side, and I'm just grinding that steel away to get rid of our relief. But as far as sharpening the nose here, I've got my platform set, and we want to just swing that. That way we can continue this radius we have on the nose, and that way it doesn't turn out to be a square end scraper again. So we want to match that same profile on the nose. And that's really all it takes. We've got a nice clean bevel on the face. We've got our fine burr here on the top, and that's really all it takes for your box scraper. So when you're grinding that relief angle, make sure you're doing it on the left wheel, because you're going to have the handle quite a ways out to the side. But as far as our nose goes, just on the platform, nice light pressure, swinging that to maintain our radius curve. That's all you need. Now let's show you the square end scraper. Alright, so our next tool is going to be just a regular square end scraper. This one has a negative rake grind on it for a specific reason. But generally speaking, square end scrapers are just a good blank canvas to grind any type of scraper that you'd like. If you wanted to grind this to a spear point, a custom hollowing tool, whatever you want, square points are a really good tool to start out with. But I usually keep a square end scraper like this in my toolbox for a specific reason, and the negative rake grind on there is for when I get further into a box. If this was a few more inches longer and I'm 2, 3, 4 inches over my tool rest, I like the negative rake on there so I can clean up the bottom of a box without it being very aggressive. That box scraper, once we get over the rest 3 inches or so, it gets really grabby and it's really aggressive. So going to a negative rake scraper is a lot more controllable, and it's not going to self-feed on me. So as you can see, as we're over the rest, I don't have to have my hand on top of the tool handle, because that negative rake grind is keeping that tool from self-feeding, and it's not going to be aggressive, especially once we're over the rest. So that's generally what I use the square end scrapers for. I almost always have a negative rake grind on those, just so I can get in there a little bit deeper, a little further over the rest without them being grabby, as well as grinding these to a custom profile. So we can show you how to sharpen this, and we'll go to our next tool. Alright, so here we have our square end scraper. This has a negative rake grind on it. Again, we never grind the negative rake profile on the top edge of the bevel unless that is getting too short and it's starting to become a regular square end scraper. So I'm going to leave that top bevel alone, and we're going to focus just on the bottom bevel here. And the key with that square end scraper is making sure we just go nice and straight into the wheel, and we're just going to be lightly touching that surface. We're not removing a lot of material. So start our grinder, and then we're just going to engage that. If you want to traverse your platform left to right, you can, but you want to just make sure that you keep that cutting edge nice and square across. So you can see we've got a really nice consistent bevel across the front. It's still nice and square, and then we still have our top bevel for our negative rake. Alright, so now let's take our custom grind scraper and show you what you can do with something with this kind of grind. Alright, so what we've got here is our custom ground scraper. You can grind your scraper to match whatever project you're doing, but this one I've ground specifically for birdhouses. You can see it's got a really narrow neck, but it allows me to get in there and hollow this out with a small opening and get that undercut rim back in there and get the wall thickness I need to keep that birdhouse light. And it started out life as just a 1/2 inch square end scraper, and then I've removed a lot of the material here on the side and given it a small round nose. But something like this is really handy because I can keep a very small opening and then still get the thickness of the wall that I need. Again, I've got my arm on top of the tool handle. So you can see with that small tool there, I can have a really small opening, just about maybe 9/16 or 1/2 inch, but it allows me to get in there and undercut this rim. Stop the lathe and see if you can see in the hole, but it allows you to get in there and make this a lot thinner and lighter on a smaller project while still having a very small opening. So, you know, you can grind these to whatever shape you need and whatever size, but I found this to be a really good tool for doing the birdhouses and small things like that, where I need a really small opening, but then I can still get the thickness and lightness I need in my piece. Alright, so let's go to the grinder and we'll show you how to sharpen this. Alright, so here we have our custom ground birdhouse ornament scraper. You can see we have that big relief cut out of there to make this tool a lot narrower, and then we have that slightly radiused front nose. As far as cutting the relief, you're going to want to use a really coarse stone wheel just to remove all that stock, and make sure as you're removing a lot of material here it's going to generate heat, so you want to make sure you dunk this in water and keep it from bluing the steel and ruining it. So you want to always keep your steel nice and cool. We always keep a little can of water next to our grinder so we can dunk it in there if we're removing and reprofiling a lot of the tools. But as far as sharpening this goes, all I need to focus on is sharpening the cutting edge of my tool. So I'm going to swing that about as far as I can go. And if I need to, I can get a diamond hone to get down in here into this corner, and that's going to allow me to sharpen just this very bottom edge. So we'll set our platform up. This one I believe is closer to 90. I think this is about an 80-85 degree bevel on this nose. But we're just going to be swinging this as far as we can without contacting the stone wheel. And then we'll be bringing this back and grinding this edge here. So. And that's all we're looking to do. We've got that really nice clean nose bevel. And then again, if you're grinding that relief angle, use your stone wheel and make sure you keep it nice and cool as you're grinding. In this video, we've covered what scrapers are, the different profiles available, how and when to use them, and also how to sharpen. Hopefully you guys learned a few tips and tricks on how to implement them into your next turning project and how you can refine the curves and surfaces and reduce your sanding time. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. And as always, subscribe to our channel for more wood turning videos.